The Get Rich Slow Club podcast is a collaboration between Tash Etchman from Tash Invest and Ana Christina from Perla. The Get Rich Slow Club acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land we record on. From coast to coast, across land, waters, and communities, we pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Any advice is general and does not consider your financial situation, needs, or objectives, so consider whether it's appropriate for you.
Welcome to the Get Rich Slow Club podcast,
where we take you from beginner to confident investor,
where we can teach you everything you need to know about investing.
So come get rich slow with us.
So we're excited about today's episode because it's all about retirement.
So exciting.
It is. It's absolutely exciting. And it's something that we all need to think about. We've got Drew Meredith, who is the founder of Wattle Partners, a specialist financial advisory firm that specializes in retirement. And Drew is actively involved in raising awareness of greater financial literacy. And you have a book that just came out too.
We do. My co-founder, business partner, and co-author on that, Jamie Nemesis as well. The golden years. Basically, we've tried to condense 15, 19 years of experience each from dealing with all kinds of families and advising them into a book of lessons and frameworks to help people live better retirements. And a lot about it, a big part of it is, moving on or making money less of a concern and allowing people to, live more freely and enjoy their retirement. Because too often you kind of see it going the other way, where all we're worried about is, what stock we've bought, what the market's doing, where retirement's supposed to be fun and enjoyable, not looking at the financial review every weekend.
Yeah, and I've seen so many terrifying things of people making mistakes right before retirement that ends up costing them so much, and they're quite simple mistakes that we could avoid if we had this knowledge beforehand.
Yeah, and it's exactly like one of our biggest selling points. It probably isn't a great sales tool, but if we can help our clients make one good decision, or more importantly, minimize the mistakes, not make one mistake, either each year or in the lead up to retirement, the value of that just should pay for advice every year and ongoing. And the only way to do that is by knowing all the mistakes people have made in the last 20 plus years.
Yeah, for sure.
We'll have to ask you that in a little bit.
Yeah. So, but before we love this intro, but we're going to ask you, what's your money win or loss? We usually start our episodes with that. Do you have something for this week?
I have been traveling a lot for a while, but I've started traveling again. So my frequent flyer points had started to accumulate.
Yes.
And just being able to book a few of those, quite a few, and a couple of, I think Tash has been online with some business class upgrades as well.
Yeah.
Being able to use it for that. And it feels like all the prices have come down and competition's back. So, not digging into the pocket or the credit card for once.
Awesome.
And using the benefit, all that spending at Woolworths or wherever else it was.
I've loved that sometimes there's no reward economy seats, but there's reward business seats, because then the decision's taken out of it and it's like, okay, fine, I'll fly business. I have to.
What about you, Tash?
I recently did some sponsor content on Instagram for cyber wardens, but the training is free and I actually really enjoyed it. So it's all about how to avoid cyber crimes and cyber attacks as a small business. It's a completely free 45-minute training, but I think that was such a money win, just like being updated and refreshed on that. And it kind of got me excited about resetting all my passwords, setting up my password manager. So I think everyone should go and do that if you're not sure what to do in terms of cyber safety.
It's such an important one.
Yeah.
If you're already thinking about your finances and like how to optimize your investments, you should absolutely think of ways of how to protect them.
it. Yeah. They were saying the average cost of a cybercrime to a small business is $46,000.
It's huge.
Crazy, yeah.
I spent a whole weekend trying to update passwords across
Did you get
all
it?
the same devices. Yeah.
It's hard.
Then you can't repeat the same password, and it was always the same password that you had before.
Yeah.
That's why password managers are so helpful.
Yeah, I've set one up now, which has been really handy. But yeah, trying to change some passwords, I was getting locked out and I had to call banks being like, please let me in.
That's how I got kicked out of my Canadian Revenue Agency.
No.
Yeah. I was telling Tash about this before, but yeah, that's updating passwords. Yeah, you get kicked out. So let's talk about retirement. Retirement is sometimes a topic that younger people do not want to talk about because it seems like a lifetime away from now.
Yeah,
but why is it important to think about it at a younger age, and why?
I mean, it is pretty boring and it's hard to kind of get people excited about it. I made some notes for this and that was it. Like, it is hard if you're in your 20s or 30s to get excited. But the way I kind of think about it is that you whether you're planning for retirement or not, retirement ultimately gives you the flexibility to pursue interests that you want. And I know we talk a lot about following your passion. Generally, your passion doesn't pay that well earlier in your career. So I'm not saying, financial independence, retire, it kind of falls into that concept, whereas we focus mainly on people that are 50 plus going into retirement. But there's no reason you can't seek to kind of generate or put assets together to be generating a passive income that then gives you the flexibility to change your career or have a good backstop. So you're not restricted and you've got greater flexibility in everything you want to do later on. So it's more. And then probably the second part of that would be this idea that 11.5%, I had to check this before I came in, 11.5% of your salary, depending on which way you look at, is being forcibly invested on your behalf. So if it's you can't get excited about 11.5% of your potential salary being put into your name somewhere. I think it's something you should be excited about and engage with. And I think that's part of what, a big part of what you do and what other podcasts are doing is helping people be engaged on this, big pool of capital that they're being forced to save.
It's so hard because it's not exciting. I found including it in my net worth, because I like to track my net worth, has been helpful because then it is a number that's growing and it is part of my control and I can add more to it. But when you're just looking at it, you're like, oh, that's so far away and the government could change the rules and who knows when I'll actually get it.
Yeah, you have to go past that, and it will keep changing. We know that by far super will be the best environment, and it still is. And even with all the changes that have occurred over the last 15 years, it's still the best environment for that end of, the start of true retirement at 60. It's more about the fact that superannuation is probably the best asset, entity structure to be learning how to invest, because you can't touch it, because it doesn't impact on what you're doing today. It doesn't impact on your cash flow. It's this opportunity the mistakes can generally be offset if you're in your 20s or 30s or 40s, because you've got 20, 30, 40 years more. So it's more this opportunity to kind of understand investing, taking a bit of control, which you can do in all different structures. I know we'll talk about them soon. And, it kind of covers the blemishes of things that you're learning during that period where you buy the wrong investment in your own name, it will have a direct impact on your income that year or your net worth as well.
That's such a good idea. I've never actually thought about it that way. Like, a lot of people need to take the time to learn how they react to volatility in the market, but I never thought of like having your super on your phone and checking in and being like, what's my super up to? Why has it gone down $1,000? What's happening in the market? What is my super actually invested in? Like, we talk about checking in on it, but not as a learning tool. So that's such a good example.
Yeah, and I think you have to, and a big part of what we do is all about that education. So whether it's younger or older, how do you get people more involved and more engaged? And that can help, as you were saying, even cyber scams and then scams that are increasing. The more engaged you are, and it's probably become easier than ever to do it. Basically every super fund around will let you choose some of the investments that you're putting in there.
Yeah, my mum has recently gotten, in the last few years, really excited about her super. Now, whenever I go back to Perth to see her, it's on her phone and she's got one of those Samsung flip phones. So she'll be like, look at my super now. But that was only like a last few years thing that she's gotten excited about it. And it's been interesting to watch that kind of happen. And now she's like really engaged and really keen and just like, watch me grow my super.
Well, once people are clients, we kind of want them to be less involved in looking at it every day. But part of that is coming with trust, and you're trusting whoever that other party is that's investing your money on behalf. So, but being engaged 100%. Something I've done from the beginning as well.
Being engaged also by contributing to your super is a really great way to be involved, because there's obviously a tax advantage to that. I know a lot of people are like, should I invest in my super? Should I invest outside of my super? And I know it depends on the situation, but maybe it's valuable to just talk about the benefits of super.
Yeah, I think, and Paul Clitheroe, I think quoted it incredibly well. His question was more around buying shares or buying property, and it's the same as buying, investing in super, investing outside. As long as you're investing, it's a good thing. It doesn't it doesn't matter. I mean, invest in appropriately and diversify, but as long as you're going through that process, I mean, super's by far the best structure to hold your retirement capital. Once you hit 60 and hit retirement, every dollar you draw from super is tax free, and the majority of money you put into super is tax-free. And then if you start drawing a pension when you retire, or when you start drawing a pension, the income and capital gains within that structure are tax-free as well. And even from now until then, you're only taxed at 15% on income and capital gains, compared to, so the top marginal tax rate be over 40%.
Yeah, 45, 47 with Medicare levy. Yeah.
So that's just like the simple benefit of it. And I think that we get a lot of questions. So whilst most of our clients are in their 50 to 80s and 90s. There's a couple of probably centurions.
Oh, wow.
Maybe there was one centurion in there too. And I think the most, as I kind of said at the beginning, the most important part is that you're putting money towards investing and saving. And it doesn't have to be in the perfect entity structure. So we would typically not recommend people in their 20s, 30s or 40s be making larger contributions to superannuation or anything that isn't providing some sort of tax benefit. And a big part of what a good financial advisor will do. So if you're accumulating money outside, you're naturally going to have unrealized capital gains. You're going to have income, maybe income tax increasing as you get closer to retirement. So a big part of what we do is then how do you shift the majority of your wealth into superannuation, given those benefits as you get closer to retirement? And a big part of that can be, 50 onwards, where your mortgages are paid off. A lot of the time that your children are finishing school, you don't have private or any sort of school fees, and you can contribute heavily, but you can also start shifting those assets into a more tax effective environment. We've got a general rule. You want at least 2/3 of your assets in super when you get to retirement. And it's become a lot easier in the last 12, 18 months with most people not having to meet the work test and being able to contribute up to 75 now. So the government's responded to people living longer by allowing them to contribute. It used to cap out at 65 and then 67, and now it's up to 75 that you no longer need to meet a work test to make after-tax contributions.
Amazing. And there's also things like the downsizers contribution as well, where you can put more into your super when that happens too.
Yeah, and there's a big range of, I think there's about 5 or 6 different options you can do. And then there's ways to, probably getting too much detail, is how do you balance superannuation accounts, which is incredibly important. It's a big part of what we do as well. So one, you've got 2 caps. One, if there's a couple, then you've got 2 caps you can use. And a lot of the time the caps are uneven and not fully used. So there's a lot of strategies, and being able to contribute up to 75 helps in the ability to equalize those as they kind of grow during most of our lifetimes as well.
You've made me feel better when you say you probably shouldn't contribute large amounts until you're in your 30s or 40s to your super. So yeah. I'm off the hook for another few years.
Well, it's hard. You want to think about your future, right? You want to think about your retirement, but also there's a cash flow that happens at a younger age. And I know for myself, like having small kids, as much as I would love to contribute to my
you just can't.
super, I just can't. Like financially, the cash flow isn't there, right? They cost me a lot. Yeah, exactly. So then similarly, it's one of those things. When do you get excited? When should you start making that shift? And when is it really important to think about contributing? Yeah,
I think so. When you're in those younger years, your super guarantee at 11.5% is becoming an increasing. Like if you're on 100,000, that's obviously $11,500, and your cap on that is 30,000. So for people with higher incomes, it makes sense to make more of those concessional contributions, which you get a tax benefit. They're taxed at 15% when you go into superannuation, but they're not included in your margin in the tax that you pay on your salary. Another thing we talk a lot about is a lot of people have insurance in their superannuation. So one idea is to at least make sure that your contributions are keeping up with your cost of your premium. So the insurance cover isn't seeing your superannuation balance reduce. And then it depends on each person. I think we were saying that earlier as well. You can't say it depends too often, but essentially more and more people are coming to us to get advice from 50 onwards. And that's probably the perfect time if you're planning for retirement, because your cash flow starts to open up, your expenses start to reduce, your salary, you're probably at peak earnings capacity around then as well. And the options are wide open. Once you get to within that 10 years of being able to access your money, you feel a bit more comfortable putting money into there. Being 20, 30 years away, it's very, very difficult, particularly if you're not engaged as well.
Like what you said earlier about it doesn't really matter as long as you're doing something. Like don't get too caught up in it. As long as you're investing, looking to buy property, it doesn't really matter if you're investing inside or out of super at 20 or 30, like that matters later down the track. Yeah,
we meet a lot of clients that get that analysis, paralysis analysis, and it's exactly the same there. If you have too many options, or if there's too many restrictions around it, it's just incredibly difficult to make a decision.
Yeah, this flows into my next question. I've been seeing so many more ads about self-managed super funds from Stake and other providers where they're like, set up a self-managed super fund for only $600 or something, and there's lower fees and you have more control.
Yeah.
What are self-managed super funds and who should actually be looking at them?
I think the relevance of self-managed super funds is it waned for a while. It's coming back, but it's also, I think we're seeing a bit of a pushback from clients on SMSFs, being the short version of it. Essentially, there's 3 types of superannuation funds in Australia, and they're subject to the same tax rules. You don't get any specific different benefits. There's a bit more flexibility in SMSFs. There's industry funds, and there's retail super funds, so something like BT or CFS, Hub24, most people have heard of. And then there's SMSFs. And the difference between each of them is basically the ability to outsource investment decisions, or how much you control you want over each. So industry funds, you fully outsource every part of the investment decisions. Professional managers, teams of hundreds of people are taking care of it. Retail super, you're either outsourcing every decision or you've got an advisor that's helping you pick, but from a limited range of investments. SMSFs just give you complete flexibility. So as you're saying, groups like Stake offering these options is the ability for those people to choose every single investment that goes into their fund.
A bit scary the way they're advertising it on social media, because it doesn't seem to be like these are like, sure, there's risks, but they're not really highlighting the risks and who should do it. And I think it's scary that someone who's like, oh, I'll put it all on crypto, something random. Or like whatever I want.
This might not be proven, and I'm not sure if there's evidence. I'm sure someone will look into it, but there aren't many countries in the world where you can take your own retirement capital. A lot of it's still defined benefit and choose every investment. Essentially control your retirement outcome. So we find that a bit scary.
Yeah, especially when you don't have to get financial advice to use it. It seems like it'd be good if you had to get a financial advisor, but the fact that anyone can just be like, I'm going to put it all on GameStop.
Yeah, you can go online, you can buy crypto. There's a lot of clients that came in in 2021 that had 30-40% in crypto, which had been fine for a period, and then in a heap of really high growth tech stocks or venture capital. And we spend years trying to justify diversification. If you've done incredibly well, it's hard to tell someone that
it won't
should
be like
diversify
that forever.
more. Yeah. But ultimately, SMSFs are only there for people who want control over their investments, want to know where every dollar is invested and want a say in where every dollar is invested. I think it's a big part is around the cost and if they have if they're interested in investing in other asset classes would be a big one. Historically, I think ASIC was historically quite vocal about SMSFs being, difficult, a lot of work, or the ATO. And industry funds have been there's been this kind of turf war between industry funds and SMSFs. They say as low as $250,000 in super could warrant having an SMSF. Part of that's because groups like Stake have brought the cost of setting up a self-managed super fund, and then the ongoing work required to keep one open is much lower than it used to be.
$250K per individual to open.
They just say $250 in total for a fund.
Okay.
And that one of the differences for SMSFs is kind of you're alluding to there is instead of having two Australian super accounts, you can actually combine your super. It's still kept separate and in your own name, but you're combining it into a single entity and you're investing it together, pulling it all together.
Is that beneficial or not?
It depends on the cost.
Yeah,
so
right.
If you're able to execute that and invest that at a cost that's better than what you can do elsewhere, definitely. If you think about one of your top tips would probably be consolidate your super funds.
Yeah.
So it's just another way to consolidate your superannuation accounts. We'd say usually you need at least, I think it's much more than 250. I think you want at least 500,000 and contributing if you're going to go into that structure. The minimum requirement, because in the other alternatives, Australian Super acts as a trustee, some sort of superannuation entity acts as a trustee for a retail super fund, you're the trustee for your SMSF. And in that instance, the only thing you have to do for an SMSF every year is a tax return and audit and prepare a set of financial statements. And most of the time that comes at a fixed cost of about $3,500. So if you think
that's pretty high. Yeah.
If you think, and that's like a proper audit and in an accounting firm and yourself as your own trustee. I think the other ones are slightly different SMSF structures that you're still getting the benefit of a larger, this might be getting too much detail, responsible entity acting as a trustee for you if you're using some of the other platforms. So if you think about that, on $250,000, 3,500 is quite a large, it's more than 1%.
Yeah.
On 500 and increasing, it starts to become a bit more beneficial. But there are a lot of extra strategies and flexibilities the SMSF structure provides.
Who should actually be using one though? So we've said, yes, maybe you should have at least $500,000, but who do you think this is actually a good idea for and who should avoid it?
So you have to be engaged, highly engaged. And I think that the talk that you have to be able to control your investments, I have a whole heap of administration. We know that most of that can be outsourced. I think you have to be engaged. We generally see, while we say 500 and increasing, it's really cost effective. You think an SMSF is fixed cost, whereas everything else charges a percentage. So that administration cost is fixed. So once you get to $1 million, it just far outweighs the benefit of the cost of any of the other options. And then you have to be really interested in investments. Historically, SMSFs were popular because retail super funds didn't offer a great broad range of investments, but there's been so much advancement in that sector that the difference between the two isn't as far as it used to be. And that's a big part. So any client that comes to see us, we look at all three options. We talk to them, find out what they're interested in, whether they want control, how much input they want, whether they just want to outsource, and then find one of those three options that works for them.
Yeah, that's interesting with the evolution of technology and fees coming down and accessibility, how that absolutely changes the landscape of finance, right?
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes, I mean, there's a quote that we always pull out as well, which is if it's free, you can be the product in some cases. Like so, and SMSFs historically, they're no names, but a lot of the time there's really high incentives or low cost up front, but there's something happening in the background. It used to be commissions, it used to be hidden fees. So it's just being aware, and it is much easier. I think the benefit of things like retail super funds and other options is that, and having an advisor is the ability to protect from scams and kind of cyber events, because our bank calls us immediately if anything weird happens in any of our clients' accounts. So having that extra layer of security and support comes with it.
It's really important.
Quite popular on TikTok to talk about getting a self-managed super fund to buy property, because people have got property outside of their super funds as well. Do you think that's a good strategy to own property outside your super and also inside your super and not have shares?
I only just downloaded TikTok this week because I'm going to start working. I shouldn't say that though. I think it's good to have, as long as you're putting money, towards investing, I think it's a good thing. We're seeing a trend away from property, particularly for anyone that lives in Melbourne or Victoria, given all the tax changes. And that probably shows, again, the benefit of diversification, that a lot of people have relied solely on property and putting money into property. If that is what you're relying on your super fund and what you're relying on personally, you're subject to land tax changes, stamp duty changes, tenant issues. So I generally, having a lot of our clients come to us with 80% in property, and they're already wanting to diversify, but it's for us, once you get to retirement or even just to generate a passive income, you want to diversify that as much as possible and make it as resilient as possible from every kind of shock. And it's difficult to do that given how lumpy properties are.
Yeah.
I just watched Evan Lucas on this program about boomers, which was really interesting. Have you watched
cuts
it?
On Instagram. I didn't see the whole thing.
It was so good. But there was one part which was really interesting because a lot of these retirees were talking about how they built wealth. And then you heard this one story of this gentleman who built wealth through property through an SMSF. Jeez, I said that too fast. And they both went bust. And how much financially that impacted his retirement due to the fact that he was trying to manage his own properties and they went poorly. Do you see examples of this quite a bit? I
got emails from clients this week that kind of reflected. I've advised them on multiple occasions that they should look to diversify, but every few months I get an email, we bought another property. But it was, I need $30,000 from my other super fund, so the SMSF, to help pay for the chain, like a restumping or something major that's happened to a property. So, and I think the bad stories about property aren't talked about as much as the good stories. Everyone just assumes because we've been in an environment where interest rates have fallen for 30 years that property just goes up.
Everyone talks about the wins, right? Yeah. It's a win. I made so much off my property, off my shares, off my whatever, but it's not talked about enough how volatile it can be, how crippling it can be to your wealth, right?
And restrictive. One of the big things where we talk about a lot of people in their 50s, it's like, do I buy another property? Do I leverage now? As soon as you're adding more debt, and the same goes for superannuation, adding debt into superannuation is generally restricted. But there's a very niche kind of area where you can do it for property. It just reduces your flexibility and your ability to make other choices because you've got this drag on your income in the form of mortgage repayments. I don't think it was a concern for anyone until interest rates went above 3 or 4%.
Yeah, and if the idea with super is you want your transition to retirement or you want your pension and you want that consistent income stream, if you've just got property and you're struggling to make that an income stream, you're paying off your mortgage still, you've got expenses, then you won't have an income from it. Yeah,
and I think historically the most income you get from property was 1% to 2%. The benefit of property was in capital growth, and that's why you got negative gearing benefits. But once you get close to retirement, 1 or 2% is, it's less than half of what you can get from a term deposit these days. So that's kind of filtering through. It's taken a while, and we're seeing it kind of on the front lines with clients. It's just, it's becoming more and more difficult to justify big lumpy assets backed by debt. A lot of the times the cost of debt is the same amount of rent that you're getting.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, what's the point?
What are we doing here? Yeah.
You could be putting that capital unlevered into markets and getting, the market did 9% or the US did 22%, but you could be getting an income of 5 to 6% without the need for debt. So that's something, it's interesting when you sit back and try to take away the broad themes that are happening, which sometimes we miss going into individual client conversations.
And you want to have some kind of security in your retirement. That's absolutely crucial. So this is one example. What are some of the other mistakes that you've seen in retirement or planning for retirement?
They're kind of broad for everyone, and they probably apply to most types of investments. I think a big one is tax-driven investing. It's not as prevalent anymore, but people who are investing solely for a tax benefit.
For negative gearing, I still see that. Should I buy negatively geared property? And it's like, why do you want to lose money?
It's like the 101 to make money for the last 15. I wish I geared more in the last 20 years, because anyone who did it consistently and bought reasonably well seems to have done incredibly well. So it's making sure if you're going to make an investment decision, it's about the investment merits of that, not about the tax benefits or anything else you're getting out of it. I think a big one, which relates to two different audiences, would be over-insuring and under-insuring. So a lot of younger people under-insure, particularly once they start investing or having property and debt and other assets. But then a lot of people, as they get close to retirement, are over-insured, and your insurance gets more expensive as you get closer and closer to retirement. Naive diversification, I think that pops up in the book, is this idea, it's more relevant in retirement. I think, as I said, if you've got 30 years until you need your capital, the blemishes can be kind of covered by compounding and adding more money to it. But once you get to retirement, solely relying on kind of an index fund by itself that is 40% in two sectors is not going to give you much resilience against what's going on in the market. And also this idea of, and a lot of advisors are guilty of it, is that all that matters is income. So if you only invest for income, all you're going to get is income. And a lot of the time, history analysis has shown that companies that are paying out all their dividends never really grow. So one of our big golden rules is I plus G equals total return. So income plus growth. It's very simple rule.
Yeah.
But I think most young people are more concerned about the growth. And then when people get close to retirement, all they worry about is the income. But you can see at the moment with inflation, cost of living, growing your capital is as important as generating an income from it. And that's led to so many clients, older clients, coming to us and saying, it starts at, we don't want to invest overseas. And that just makes sense. Like, you have an iPhone, you use Dropbox.
Interesting.
You use a PDF whenever we send you things via DocuSign. All these companies, like the biggest in the world, but they're afraid of investing overseas.
It's like the home country bias, right? Like being like, I just want to invest in Australia because that's what fear. I know. Yeah, fear.
It feels like it's high risk, even though it's Apple, Microsoft. These are like $2, $3 trillion businesses.
Yeah. I've seen it kind of be the other way now with people in my comments saying like, why would I invest in shares if I can get 5.5% on my savings account? They're not looking at like the total return. They're just like, well, if your dividends are 2% and my savings account is 5%, why would I bother risking all of my money?
Which can be right for a short period of time. But the problem with savings accounts is they're variable, they're floating rate. So as soon as interest rates start to fall, and they will fall at some point, they won't go up forever. They might stay flat for a while. Then you've got the issue we have with term deposits. We recommend a term deposit. You get 4.8, but what rate are you going to get in 12 months' time when that comes up?
And what have you missed out on in growth in that year?
And capital goes nowhere. And if you're thinking after inflation, and inflation's out tomorrow, I'm not sure when this is recording, or going live, but inflation is likely to be around 4%. So if you're getting 4.8 on a term deposit, you've got 0.8 left over after the cost of...
And then you pay tax on it.
Exactly.
Forgot about that one too. I think it's incredibly important to have, and that's like, we're not saying we don't use term deposits, but you need to balance growth and income, because for most people, retirement is something like 35 years from the point. At the very least, it's 30 years. So if you think about that, if you're just drawing income and you're only investing in term deposits, you're going to be eating into your capital incredibly quickly. And while markets don't necessarily return 10% every year like they have over the last year, we know that over the long term, companies have evolved and have been a great way to grow capital. And I think it's the most important lesson we kind of keep reiterating. I had an advisor ask me a question. It's a complicated situation there, but he was saying in this case it was gold, but it could be global shares, could be anything. Like, why would you hold that when it doesn't provide an income? I mean, that's the whole point. It's a hedge, or for global shares.
An advisor asked you that?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
It's a hedge, or it's a source of future growth, or something that's just going to perform differently to the banks and resource companies that you're relying on for most of your income in Australia.
Gold is a hedge? I thought that's what it was used for, or store of value.
Yeah. But then it's been one of the best performing asset classes over the last 3 years. I think it's been returning 15. Not saying I'm a gold bug or recommending gold.
There's either a lot of love or a lot of hate for gold, right?
It makes sense from a retirement perspective. I think not just gold, but having hedges, could be infrastructure, could be other types of property, commercial property.
Controversial, but people say Bitcoin.
It could be. I mean, we're not something we recommend within that kind of context, but it is just finding multiple sources of income and growth. So if the Australian economy doesn't do well, the US economy doesn't do well, you're still going to be able to generate the income that you need and the returns that you need.
It's so important at that time. It's completely different than when you're in this stage in life when you're like working and bringing in money. It's completely different when you're like, this is what I'm living off of.
And
it's scary. It's like a mind switch, right?
And we say when we present, it's like what we specialize in generating a passive and sustainable growing income from a finite pool of capital. And it's that finite that people don't really, don't quite understand. You retire, you get sent a statement and you just get left alone.
Good luck.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, especially with the aging population as well, it's going to get harder to be able to survive just off the pension. It's going to get more complicated as well. So it's now more than ever the time to be like, cool, we need to prepare now.
And the people starting to retire now have had the benefit of more superannuation, like superannuation having been in place for longer. I think the last 10 or 15 years was a big group of people that didn't have the benefit of forced saving. So most people are having some sort of balance in super and the need to be engaged and involved.
Yeah. Lots of us have parents who are about to retire or getting ready to retire. What kind of things can we do to help them out or things that we can hint at them to look at?
I just help them get engaged, like find podcasts, Facebook pages, groups, whatever
Tash's
it is.
Mom sharing her phone, her super balance.
Give them your book.
Just engagement because like we know financial literacy in Australia isn't particularly good and it's even worse for that kind of generation. Maybe part because of technology. I'm not 100% sure. It's why
they liked property.
Yeah, I mean, property did so well. Everything did so well. I give a copy of my book if you want to plug that on there as well.
Yeah.
What's it called again? The Golden Years.
The Golden Years, yeah.
Not to be confused with the Golden Girls.
No. I Googled Golden Years the other night and all kinds of old movies came up as well. I think it's all about getting engaged and giving them the confidence to get advice. It's like this idea that the incumbency isn't good. Incumbency, there's so many opportunities to be either saving money, getting better returns, or just having a better understanding of what's happening. So it's, starting that process. There was a stat that came out from a think tank. I think it's Connexus think tank. There was something like at least half of people over 65 in an industry fund hadn't started a pension, and starting a pension makes all your capital completely tax-free. And if you're over 65, it's a no-brainer, even if you're still working. So many people, because it's industry funds, it's very hard for them to give advice to so many people. They were missing out on this huge tax saving and probably, a couple of % extra in returns every year because they hadn't been engaged or made that decision. So
yeah, I have a friend who works at a call center for one of the big super funds, and some of the stories he tells are pretty horrifying because they can't give advice. He'll have people who are retiring call up and just be like, I want to move all my super into cash because I'm stressed about the market or something like that. And then they'll move it back into shares and keep jumping in and out multiple times, and did that during COVID as well. So missed out on heaps of the growth. And that's scary to think, like, if you don't have that advice, to be like, hey, probably shouldn't be doing that. Like, they're just calling them up and changing it around. Yeah,
and there's a lot of, they're all probably finance sector words, but there's a lot of orphaned clients from what happened.
Clients,
during, I don't know.
Interesting.
Wait, what's the definition?
So what happened after the Royal Commission, so all the major banks were involved in financial advice, but most of them stopped providing advice. And a lot of those clients are on different platforms supported by the banks that were supported by the financial advisors of those banks. And because those advisors no longer exist, exactly this example, there's thousands of people who had an advised relationship no longer have one, and they have their superannuation kind of just sitting there. And those groups can't advise them. They no longer have licenses to do that. So it's kind of just
They're just talking to a customer service people being like, warning, but you can't even warn them and say, don't do that.
They can't even refer them
in
this very difficult position. So that's like, if you're in that situation, it's getting rid of the, I'm not sure what the right word is about not discussing money with your
start
family.
Talking about it.
Yeah, the stigma of discussing money is because most of our parents came in the post-war generation or the post-depression generation. So most people just squirrel away money, save as much as they can. Yeah. So opening up on those discussions and helping them become more engaged and be willing to seek advice. And I've had a lot of clients referred to me by their children who listen to another podcast and say, you should go to talk to Drew. And I had a meeting with a client this week, and one of his 4 daughters came in, was grilling me with questions.
Oh, I like that. That would be good.
I was like, but it's more about you can go to the financial advice meeting with your parents and just get them engaged if you think they need help.
Well, you want to look after them, right? You want to your parents work their whole lives to have some kind of nest egg. You want to make sure that they're looking after it. In many cases, that's going to be transferred potentially down to their kids as well.
You've got a vested interest.
You have a vested interest as well. And that's another thing. That's this is supposed to be one of the biggest wealth transfers in history that's coming up. Do you see a lot of that already now in terms of what you're thinking about with your clients in terms of inheritance and so forth?
I think clients hit a certain age and then they start thinking about legacy. And we had 5 stages of retirement in the book, and then we kind of talk about 3 with our clients, which is golden years, silver years, legacy years. And that's
not
when
bronze years, we're not going down.
We can't go bronze. It's legacy. And they're all, we're going to go, you could go grey or other years. It's more when you think about that wealth transfer. So where I think it's because of how much wealth's being created, whether through share markets or property, it's incredibly important to start having those open conversations. And we don't talk to our clients about making decisions based on the fact that they might receive large inheritances. But if you knew what might come in 10, 15, 20 years' time, it can give you, confidence to make different decisions in your life as well.
Take more risks and be like, this might be coming.
And you don't just think you're going to rely on that. Again, it's just about engagement. So we'll do, when we're preparing wills or helping clients with wills, we'll bring children along for the ride. And it can be challenging for our, 60, 70-year-old clients to say, here's the assets that we have, here's my portfolio. And a lot of the time the kids aren't aware of how strong a financial position or that they're not in a strong financial position. Like the amount of lifestyle properties or holiday houses that are held because the kids might use them when that could be, that capital could be used to be living a better life now.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time the kids aren't that aware of their parents' financial situation. So it's just getting involved, making it a dinner table conversation more and more often.
I grew up in a family where we spoke about money really openly, and it's been so helpful for me to learn about it. But even with my grandparents, now that they're getting older, my grandma will call and be like, I really want to take my money out of the bank and put it in a safe somewhere. Yeah. And we're like, oh no, let's not do that, or let me come with you. Because one time ages ago, she wanted to go buy some gold. So she went to the mint and carried home gold in her handbag as like a 70-year-old. And we were like, oh my God, don't do that. But yeah, just having those conversations being like, no, we can trust the bank. No one's taking your money away from you yet. It's fine. Like Labor's not going to steal your money. It's okay.
Yeah, and getting a copy of the their superannuation statement and like just trying to be involved and engaged in those sort of things. And I think even more importantly with wealth transfer is making sure the next generation's engaged, because so many times the children that inherit aren't prepared for what they're inheriting and don't have a strategy in place, don't know what they value, and it can just end up being, you can't say wasted, but it, not necessarily used as efficiently or last as long as it could.
Yeah, and the stuff around scams as well is terrifying, because I have some people message me saying like, I've just inherited $500,000. What do I do? And I find that a bit terrifying because there's so many fake accounts made of me. There's so many people who would take advantage of that. So it's definitely worth, like, if you get an inheritance, go get advice, go chat to someone. Don't jump at doing anything straight away with it.
Yeah, and in like you would any professional, meet a few different advisors.
Yeah.
Everyone's more accessible now.
Get your daughter to grill them.
Yeah, exactly.
but it is important, right? You want the best kind of situations for everyone in that, right? Like you don't want your parents to get screwed over. You don't want yourself to get screwed over. It's a scary time, especially if you're going to get a lot of money. And then if you are the one inheriting that money, you potentially might need advice to figure out what's the best way to use that capital as well, right?
And how to prepare for it.
Yeah.
I've seen parents do things like make contributions on behalf of their children when they're in their 40s and 50s, because it's a good way of passing that inheritance early. And I think that is a growing part as well, given the significant amount of wealth that's being created. If people are selling properties, downsizing, it's bringing forward a portion of that. But
the living inheritance.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, Die with Zero. Have you read that book?
No, I keeps looking at Owen's desk. There's Die with Zero there. And I keep seeing it. I'm like, I read it was something like The Race to Zero, but not Die with Zero.
Yeah, Die with Zero. Yeah. And a lot of that is like, you have a lot of money and you potentially, like if you're financially savvy and so forth, you'll make a lot of money, but there's an optimal time when to use that money, right? And in those times in your life when you're younger, you might want to adventure or go on a hike, and you might need that money then. Whereas when you're older in your later years, you might have a lot of money, but nothing to spend it on.
Yeah.
And if you have loved ones in your life, you might want to give that money earlier so you can see them enjoying it or building that life instead of when you pass away. Do you see a lot of that happening too? Are people trying to plan earlier for that and pass money on, or are they doing it like, they'll get it when I'm dead?
Bit of both. I think majority are very supportive of kids, whether it's in the form of, bank of mum and dad offering, guarantors or help with deposits or even superannuation contributions and building investment portfolios for them. I think that's become there's very few that say it's only for me now.
Yeah. Although you should travel if you can, right?
Yeah.
I'd definitely be flying business everywhere if I could.
I've had to advise on that before as well.
On business class flights?
I had a client who's completely in a strong position. I think he's 65 and he would be like 6'2", like quite
but frugal
large.
Ways, doesn't want to spend the money.
And he's like, I'm doing this trip from Melbourne to Europe and then Europe to America. And he's like, economy's this, premium's this, business is this. I was going to do a premium. I'm like,
you've got the
are
money.
You crazy?
Yeah. It sounds like my granddad. He's 87, still works, is still so frugal, refused to spend on so much stuff. Like one time he bought me a $9 cheese and it was such a big deal that he splurged on this $9 cheese. But it's just like that point where you're like, well, what are you doing now? Like, are you not going to enjoy it now? But it's hard to like change from that mindset of saving to spending.
Business should be like how to help people spend their money that they can afford to spend in retirement. I mean, I think the question you had before was your spending isn't linear in retirement. So basically everyone thinks that, or all the modeling just shows you spend the same amount and it goes up by CPI. But the golden years, as we've coined sort of, you spend a lot more. You're very mobile. You can travel. You can take your kids away. You can do all these things and you can afford to do it, and that's where probably you spend 40 to 50% of your capital, or you're spending more than you normally would. But then it changes very quickly. You become less mobile. There's more grandchildren. There's more like things to do at home. You start to doing domestic travel more. And then the next stage is things like aged care and in-home care and all these other options come into play as well. And your discretionary spending reduces significantly. And for some people, the golden years are 10, 15, 20 years. For some, they're 5, and then they go into different directions as well. So realizing that your spending won't be the same throughout, and it will spike at different periods.
And certain families have completely different financial kind of trajectories, right? Where there's adult children who need to look after their own parents because they might not have that money in their retirement.
Yeah, exactly. So
they're the ones who have to pay for the aged care and think about that. That's hard. That's like the sandwich generation, right? My generation, young kids, older, aging parents. How do you manage the financial stress of that?
Yeah. And it's just like engaging professionals. So we have to be good at aged care naturally. That's our kind of client base. And a lot of it is our clients had been our clients' parents, not the other way. You just expect to be the other way. They're not quite there yet. Our client base isn't that old, but it's how do you have to be engaged and you have to be proactive on it and get rid of this. There's this kind of fear around selling the family home. I think it's still there.
Big one.
We know owning a home when you retire you're going to put you in a much better position than if you don't, and you've got a very good base, you don't have to pay rent. But the amount of capital and money that sits in homes that are too big for people, we can't really recommend it because it's it can be very emotional topics to discuss. But being able to free up those assets to then pursue and enjoy your life more and have the flexibility to be ahead of things like retirement living, and it's not always aged care. There's retirement and all those other options. So being ahead of the discussion rather than behind it.
Yeah. This has been such a fun chat. We're going to have to wrap it up. Time has gone so quickly. Thank you so much for joining us. Everyone should definitely go buy your book, gift it to your parents, gift it to your grandparents, gift it to whoever.
Bring my copy too.
Yeah, I didn't bring mine as well next time. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. And what's your financial advice firm if people want to go say hi to you and refer their parents?
So Wattle Partners, wattlepartners.com.au, just named after the tree. Nice and easy. And then, our emails and our growing, I think our team of 12, you probably met a couple of other advisors as well. But growing quite quickly.
Awesome.
Perfect.
And the golden years.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us. If you found this episode helpful, please rate us 5 stars, write a review, or share with a friend. If you're new to investing, make sure to listen to our first 10 episodes. Follow us at Get Rich Slow Club or Tash at Tash Invest or me at Ana Cristina.
This show was brought to you by Natasha Etchman, who is an authorized representative 1299881 of Guideway Financial Services, AFSL 420367, and Perla, who is an authorized representative 1281540 of Sanlam Private Wealth, AFSL 337927. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to investing. So make sure you check out our financial services guides and read the product disclosure statement and target market determination for any investments you're considering. See our show notes for more info.